This will be a day long remembered. Now I am the master.
Welcome to another episode of Legends and Theories.
And welcome to my review of Batman Caped Crusader, Season 1. And if you have not watched this yet, then I highly recommend going and watching the show. Even if you're a few episodes in, go and finish the show. I am going to be reviewing the entirety of Season 1. And speaking of spoilers, this was honestly a great season, and so glad that we are actually getting some good content this year instead of just stuff like The Acolyte. So, yeah, let's just go into this because this was as I said, an insane season. Really can't believe how much happened. I want to go each episode in order, and I've watched them all today. The episodes 4 to really more of 5 to 10 are going to be a little more prominent in my mind because those are the ones I just watched through. I watched the first three and like 3.5 earlier today. So, starting off, we have episode 1. This is one where he goes up against the Penguin. And let's get the big elephant out of the room for this episode of them changing Penguin to being a woman. And honestly, I didn't really mind it. It felt like it was the Penguin still, but honestly, I feel like I'd rather had them save Penguin to be coming in later on. So it was pretty interesting. They are very clearly inspired by the animated series, with Rupert Thorne being such a major antagonist in this. He was essentially the main mob boss in the animated series, and that's honestly just something really interesting in here that they went with him. I wasn't really sure who the main villain would be in terms of the main gangster. I could have went with Falcone since they never went with him during Batman the Animated Series, but I decided to go back to a classic animated series villain with Thorn, and although he feels pretty similar, he's a lot more ruthless here. They're able to actually have death and a little bit of chaos in this, and that's honestly just something pretty unique to this compared to the animated series, which ultimately had to remain kid friendly enough in terms of they really couldn't kill anyone, but they went pretty dark in the animated series. But Caped Crusader, yeah, this was just a really incredible season. But going back to episode 1, Penguin here, she was a decent antagonist for this. As I said, I think that they probably should have waited to use Penguin, or if they kept Penguin, Penguin should have been kept as a threat in the background. I would love to see a rivalry between Penguin and Thorn coming out, but ultimately was it was pretty reminiscent, I'd say, of the Gotham version of Penguin in terms of how Penguin would emotionally act out in that show. The exact same happens in this one. When Penguin gets even a hint of betrayal, she goes completely off and executes the people, even if it is her own kid. And honestly, I feel like probably a little smarter to look into that, but she totally got played by Thorn, and honestly, it is ultimately understandable enough for someone in the criminal underworld to overreact like that. I'm betting she regrets doing that now with her other son being the traitor and ultimately turning her in. But yeah, honestly, though the first episode was good, moving on to episode 2, this was honestly a really great one with the character of Clayface. This is based off the original Clayface from the comics and not the far more well known Clayface, which is, although originally with the Clay powers Matt Hagen, it was also generally retconned to be Basil Carlo who gets the Clay powers also. But honestly, this is just such a fresh and unique take to have on Clayface to go back to this original version, since essentially every version of Clayface we see is just the actor who uses the Clay formula to shapeshift and have all these different abilities. But this different take was honestly pretty unique. It was pretty interesting to see, and that was probably one of the most unique parts of this. And going back to this classic Clayface, which no real other animated series could do, since Clayface is a serial killer and they couldn't go into something like that. To speak of something that I did notice in this, they're also trying very clearly to, although have this be very mature and although it's more intended for an older audience, it is really allowed for anyone to see. If you take a look at different scenes, there's no real blood when characters get shot, even when they suffer fatal injuries. And even once dark stuff happens, it's generally happening just off screen. I mean, in the last episode, when Two-Face is killed, they don't even show any blood coming from his wounds. So, that's honestly something I think that we've seen at least some blood in PG-13, which I think this is it's supposed to be since it says TV-14. So I think some blood is acceptable, but it really didn't seem like they were showing any in this. Another thing I wanted to mention just around now is honestly, I didn't love their adaptation of Harvey Bullock. It felt like they just took the worst parts of the character and stuck with that, with him being corrupt. But Harvey Bullock is usually just, oh, typically he's well-meaning, but he is a little more tough to deal with. And obviously, the best version of him was probably from Gotham, closely followed by his animated series adaptation. But he's always more of a comedy relief character, and wouldn't, I don't know, just most versions of him I see wouldn't do this. I just wish that they picked a different police officer to be Flask's partner, and I wish we could have got a little more classic version of Bullock, and it doesn't seem like we'll be really seeing him anymore with him being taken down in the last episode, although Thorin said he would get them out. So honestly, who really knows? But going on to, well, this episode again, I keep jumping all over the series, but I'm trying to keep this roughly episode by episode. As I said, Clayface was pretty interesting. I think that it was honestly just really crazy to see everything going on here, and I think that it was pretty cool to see Clayface here. Moving to episode 3, this was honestly one of my favorites of the season. This is the Catwoman episode, and well, Catwoman was interesting in this, and I did enjoy her interactions with Batman. It definitely felt like one of the most classic Batman things in here. There is honestly just the better part of this episode was looking into Bruce's past. Yes, this is like the 1,000th time you've seen his origin story, but Honestly, I just like the really little scene where the young Bruce declares his war on crime, and I think that was a really nice moment. I've also just really enjoyed the relationship between Bruce and Catwoman. It was a little more one-sided in this one, where Bruce isn't as interested in her, but still, it was honestly just a lot of fun going through just so much more of the episode. There is just so many fun things that happen, and the relationship between, I said, Bruce and Catwoman is a lot of fun, but there's also just complete chaos going on. I think that Catwoman's maid was, although a unique and new character, was kind of a fun character to bounce off of, and her ultimate betrayal at the end was kind of funny. And yeah, honestly, I think that was really well done. Going on to the next episode. This is the one where the police are sent after Bruce. This one honestly is probably one of the more intense episodes of it, and this one has Firebug. Actually, not to confuse him with Firefly. Although I think, there was the joke of referring to him as Firefly, people knowing that character more. And this character was honestly insane. I think that it was just really interesting to see. I think that trying to take down Batman was a pretty interesting story to see from the police perspective. This is obviously something we see a bunch and was shown in Batman Year One. And in this one, they're going to a different method where they can't catch Batman with normal conventional traps. So we have Bullock and Flask going and trying to set up a trap for Batman by letting Firebug out. You see as the GCPD is humiliated throughout the episode and eventually reaches the end point where Firebug goes on this intense attack, committing some pretty serious crimes of arson. And although they don't say anyone was killed, there probably was someone. If not, it was truly a miracle. But Batman manages to fight through and eventually helps save the kids and people in there. He doesn't have to go after Firebug really at all. Firebug escapes from him pretty quickly and is eventually cornered by Flask and Bullock, who kill him. And this makes them look like heroes in everyone's eyes, even though they are the ones who let him free. And some people, like Gordon, know, but there's nothing they can prove. And with this, I also think that this was pretty interesting to see. Honestly, I really am excited when I finish this up to continue on. And then the back half of the season, from episodes 5 to 10, gets just even more intense. And there's just two mindsets I have on this. While I really enjoyed seeing this all in one day, this would also been exciting to watch week to week. Maybe episodes 1, 2, and maybe 3 coming out today and watching one a week. But I'm still really glad I saw all of it today. And it's one of those things where it would have been a little more fun to talk about this over the weeks and to ultimately see where things ended up. But still, I'm not complaining that we got an entire season of an incredible show. And honestly, this will never really live up to the legacy of Batman the Animated Series. It'll never surpass that, but it's doing a good job of honoring it and still making a great show. And this will never be, honestly, as good as that show, but it still is really good. Looking at episode 5, this is the Harley Quinn one, and this has a really unique version of Harley Quinn. Going back a few episodes ago in the Catwoman one, I forgot to mention this, but another interesting thing in that is Bruce in his therapy sessions, and him actually punching someone for insulting his mother. And that episode was pretty interesting to see, and another I think that made that one of the better episodes of it. But here, Harley Quinn is just a really different version of the character. She is still ultimately a good person at heart and wants to punish the rich who really don't care about people at all. And everything with her was well done. She is a little more terrifying in this version. She kidnaps these terrible rich people who only really care about themselves and treating everyone else like complete garbage, and she is turning them into essentially her slaves, but also making them give up all their money. And honestly, it was pretty interesting to see in here. This is honestly a really unique adaptation of her, and her being friends with both Barbara and Montoya was pretty unique. There's also the fact that I didn't really mention Barbara yet, but this is also a really unique version of Barbara Gordon, who is a lawyer, with this being set in the 40s. Her typical computer skills aren't going to be fitting into this time period. So yeah, honestly, also the time it's set in, it's just really cool to see something in. It's a completely different era. It's pretty unique for Batman, and you really haven't seen something like this since his original comics back in the late 30s to early 40s. But yeah, going back to the Harley Quinn episode, I think that it was pretty interesting. They also have a bunch of adaptations of some more obscure Batman villains, like King Tut, who are being brainwashed by Harley, and honestly, it was just pretty interesting to see. I think that it was just a lot of fun to see some of these more obscure villains, and the version of Harley Quinn here was just pretty different. I also like how she did still have morals and wanted to go back to save Barbara. She is still alive, but she isn't leaving for now. She'll probably be back in season 2 since that almost certainly seems to be happening. Going to the next one, we have honestly one of my favorite ones because of how unique it was. This is the one dealing with Gentleman Ghost, and this was just a really fun episode. This one does confirm this is a more mystical universe, and also gives us the idea that some characters can be appearing in this, which are potentially being set up in this. This makes me think of both the fact that Plastic Man as Eel O'Brien was shown as a reporter, and Jim Corrigan, who eventually becomes the Spectre, was also in this. I'll speak of Jim Corrigan in the next episode when I talk about that. But for now, this one, Gentleman Ghost. Honestly, this was just a lot of fun. This is the first time Gentleman Ghost has really been taken seriously, as in anything I've seen. The only other time I've seen him is in Brave and the Bold, where that is a more fun and lighthearted show, so he isn't taken as seriously, even though he was stealing souls and eventually was got the death sentence. But honestly, I think that it was just a lot of fun here. I think that it was really unique, and showing that this universe has its more mystical side is something that Batman the Animated Series never really did, even when it did have mystical characters like Zatanna. It always went to the fact that it was a more grounded universe. This is obviously a more mystical universe, and other spin offs can happen from it. I also didn't really know who the character was that Bruce made a deal with. I was expecting maybe Etrigan or Madame Xanadu, but didn't really recognize this one, so I wasn't really sure who was, but honestly, it was still pretty interesting. I think that the Batman in this one trying to figure out that ghosts really exist and willing to take that wider step into a crazier world was pretty unique, and Well, obviously, when I'm talking about animated series, I'm talking about original seasons because when I was talking about the magic stuff, because there is an episode with Etrigan that takes place in one of the final seasons, but that's after the show got rebooted and Superman the Animated Series was introduced. But with this one, honestly, it was just a pretty fun, unique episode. Another one of my favorites just because of how different it was. And I think they did a really great job with it. Going on to the next episode, which is episode 7. This is the one where there's a hit out on Gordon, and throughout it you think it is Commissioner Gordon, and I had a feeling like it would be a twist that would be Barbara. And it turns out that I was right, and with this, we get the villain Onomatopoeia coming. I believe in the comics, Onomatopoeia does have the ability to, whatever sound he makes is turned into a projectile by him, or, whatever its equivalent is. But honestly, I think that it was still a pretty unique version in this, pretty fun to see, and a little more obscure character that has appeared more and more, with Onomatopoeia being adapted into Bruno Mannheim's wife in Rune Low Season 3, and being an assassin in this. There's also a small appearance from Deadshot, which was pretty cool. The character is still alive, so who knows, we could see Deadshot return. And going through the rest of this episode, it's a pretty intense episode. It eventually gets to a point where Batman has to be fighting through Onomatopoeia's men as Gordon, well, both Gordons, Montoya, and Jim Corrigan are fending off Onomatopoeia's men. It eventually is revealed that the bounty is on Barbara, and Jim Corrigan wants to collect because it's a lot of money. He is taken down and is arrested. And this is different from his typical origin as the Spectre, where he's typically a little more extreme cop that is killed for essentially going after the wrong people. So I do wonder if they'll still go with him being the Spectre in this universe eventually. It could be pretty interesting to see, and maybe he'll realize how wrong he was and want to seek redemption, which leads to his death and reincarnation as the Spectre. So yeah, honestly, that could be pretty interesting to see, but who knows? I'd love to see that, and honestly, I'd love to see Plastic Man in this since Plastic Man is just a really fun character. I want to see him adapted in a little more of a serious series since it's generally just been more family friendly stuff with him in it, and this is willing to go a little more mature. And the next episode in this, probably one of the darkest one, and this one is when you have the young Natalia, who is essentially a vampire in this. They're not exactly saying she's a vampire, even though they're very specific about just one ghost being a ghost, but she either is a vampire or has a very similar disease to being a vampire. And obviously, she just drink blood, but she sucks souls, which vampires typically also could do. And I'm assuming that's the cure her brother was talking about, where she just sucks souls and isn't sucking blood. Although I'm obviously making a little bit of a guess there. I don't think it is a educated guess and does make sense. This one has a bunch of cameos from a bunch of different Robins and Batman sidekicks. So I'm not really sure if they will be doing Robin in this, since we have essentially everyone besides Tim Drake show up in this that has taken the identity of Robin. Even Carrie Kelly, which is, pretty unique take. So who knows? Maybe these will just be characters that are callbacks, at least for most of them, to being Robin, since obviously the first two we don't get the last names, so they really could be anyone that just has similar names to the first two Robins. But I believe we get it fully confirmed that Stephanie Brown and Carrie Kelly are the other two. Oh, also Damian Wayne, but obviously wouldn't make sense for a Damian Wayne to be there since one, that's Bruce Wayne's biological son, and two, there's absolutely no indication that if Ra's al Ghul and Talia al Ghul exist, that they have ever interacted with Batman. But yeah, obviously this was kind of interesting, and I do want to see what they do if they eventually do Robin in this, since they also, although didn't name him Tony Zuko, it was a pretty similar name to it. They killed him off, so if they do at least do the original Robin origin story, they may have to use someone else. But now moving on to the last two episodes, which we'll talk about together. This is the Two-Face story, and this might be my favorite version of the Two-Face story because this is honestly really well done. This is built up at least partially through episode 8, where we see just so many things happening with Dent and him being tempted further and further to go and work with Thorn and take the bribe. Although he takes the money, he eventually rejects it and wants to go and convict the criminal that Thorn wants to be set free. And ultimately, this leads to him getting attacked and the acid getting thrown in his face. Interesting enough, the other side of his face, from what it typically is injured, is the one that's injured. And from this point on, Two Face is honestly just a really compelling character. He doesn't really use the coin to make his decisions, but it is referenced to. He has his two personalities, one wanting to be the good and kind of same Harvey Dent, wanting to face up to his crimes, and the other one is the Two-Face persona, which wants revenge, and I think that Two-Face shouldn't have been shown at all in the trailers. It would have been nice, although not extreme twist, but a nice thing to know that Two-Face was going to be adapted during the season. Obviously, most people know that Harvey Dent is Two-Face, but they could have been playing off in marketing that this wasn't going to happen this season. And I think if the show released week to week, that's how they would have done it. But this entire season was coming out, they just said to advertise the fact to go and help sell it. But yeah, honestly, Two-Face in this was just really compelling. Him going on this absolute rampage against Thorne's men was really cool, and they're definitely going to be able to go more extreme in this since it's a little bit higher rated, and Two-Face is actually allowed to kill people when in the animated series he still wanted revenge against Thorn, but wasn't able to use as extreme methods as burning people alive and going on a killing spree inside of Thorn's mansion. But yeah, honestly, coming through that first half was really good, and it just made better and better with the last part of it. The final episode was just really intense. It's starting off with Barbara trying to help Dent out and Dent rejecting her help. And then he is taken by Flask and Bullock. Barbara chases him down after she gets, early in the episode, Batman's phone number, and she goes and calls him up to have help after she manages to pull Dent out of the car when he finds a way to trick the two of them and escape. She handcuffs the two of them together so that he can be protected, and I'll say this was just a really intense episode, as even though I felt like everyone was probably going to be safe in this, I said there was no way they'd kill off any major character, especially someone like Two Face or Barbara. I was surprised at the end when they did kill off Two-Face and going through it. The episode is pretty intense as the two are avoiding Thorn's men and Bullock and the Flask. So I think that was honestly just a pretty good setup to have them, and then set up a network of allies for Batman to have, and being able to rely on Gordon, well, both Gordons, Montoya, and now Alfred. It was honestly just a really nice thing. Although Two-Face is killed at the end, his story was done really well with him actually sacrificing himself to save Barbara. And then a thing that honestly kind of bugged me through the entire season was Bruce just kind of coldly referring to Alfred as Pennyworth and not really showing any real emotion to him besides in the Gentleman Ghost episode, which was another part of why I love that episode so much. I wanted to save this all for the end, but Bruce eventually coming to the end where he realizes just how important Alfred is to him and all the allies he needs, and finally referring to him as Alfred was a nice bit of development for him at the end. I'm really glad they did that because if they didn't, that would have just been a major problem with the season for me. But with them resolving that at the end, it really is something that just helped a bunch. The cast was all amazing in this, and honestly, my biggest complaint is that Prime Video is completely terrible at placing ads in this. It was for, I think every episode, maybe one episode was spared, but every time the ad break popped in, it was in the middle of a scene. And when I say the middle, it literally cuts off lines of dialogue. So they're speaking of one thing. Some of them are literally at the beginning of a transition of a scene. The scene plays out for like 5-10 seconds, and then it cuts to the ad. So they need to get that fixed because they have a set time in this. So it should be between scene transitions and not literally in the middle of someone speaking a sentence. Because that happened multiple times for me. So that does need to be fixed by Prime. But besides that, this season was honestly incredible. As I said earlier, no way that this can be considered better than the animated series, but it still is really high quality. And with the animated series being the gold standard, not just for Batman shows, but I'd say for superhero shows in general, I think that it truly was a great season of television. Yes, there's some stuff that people are going to be talking about, like the female penguin and them killing off Two-Face, but this is a season that was really well done. I can't wait to see season 2, and that tease of Joker at the end was pretty interesting. He has a far darker and scarier voice than I would expect. And I wonder if they're going to bump the rating up a little bit because this Joker looks pretty intense. His voice is pretty sinister, and I can't wait to see what they do next. I want to know what you think. Please let me know in the comments, and I'll see you on the next episode of Legends and Theories.
Thank you for watching this episode of Legends and Theories. Please subscribe, like the video, share the video, leave a comment, check out the video on screen, and may the Force be with you.